Hello everyone, we are live now, we are pumping along. Hope you guys are well. Tonight we are covering Rev Squat Go and ride technique in detail to continue on the obstacle riding series. My name's Neil Price, I'm Trials and Enduro Skills, and if you are jumping onto this video and it's the first time you've seen us, it's better to go back to video 1 and watch these in order, because there's going to be quite a number of references back to things that we covered in the general theory, which was the first video. So tonight we're going to cover Rev Squat Go, the pattern that it is, and we're going to use ride technique to talk about RSG and how valuable this really is. And in the process, we're going to debunk, clarify, correct some myths that are out there in the world. Talking about, throttle acceleration, preloading, how it's actually a pain in the butt and actually causes more problems than good. We're going to cover why I don't teach unweighting, and we're going to cover that you don't need to shut the throttle off per se and whatnot. So now all of the content that is coming up in these live shows is also going to my website, trialsandenduro.skills.com. So if you miss it here or you want to see more, like the supporting documents, the PDFs and everything else, head there and you can check it all out. There's no cost, it's all free. And otherwise, just let me know how you go, because that's the important bit, helping you to ride better, ride different. So anyway, so as I said in the previous video, I want you to clear your mind of whatever jargon you may already have floating around in there from previous lessons and things. Now, as I said in the last video, there is the RSG pattern, Rev Squat Go. And this pattern sits in all of the obstacle riding techniques. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you them on the bike. And it's a little bit hard to actually see in one or two of them. So in ride technique, it's very clear, it's very obvious. In splatting, it's very clear and very obvious. But within punch technique, it's a little more refined. It happens very quickly in a short space in time. And I'll just touch on that once I've shown you all. So first of all, I'll jump on and have a look. Now, RSG is not a technique in its own, it is a pattern. And that's the really important point to remember. Techniques are how we apply the lift mechanisms themselves. So it's an important thing to remember. RSG is not a technique, it's just a pattern that we want to learn first. So anytime that we're doing ride technique, even if it's something like this, if you're stuck, we're going to rev first, doesn't need to be huge. We're going to squat, and then we're going to go on the clutch, which is the stand and release. So stand and go. If it's a bit bigger, if we're riding in, ride technique again, it's going to be rev, squat, go. We didn't drop any oil on the ground setting up today, so it's a little grippier. Less chance of me eating it today, but you still may see that. So you can clearly see there's Rev Squat Go if I am doing ride technique. Now punching, which the lift mechanism is stop, you'll hear it here as well. It's going to be shorter, it's going to be more obvious when I'm stationary. If I'm moving, it's going to be shorter and sharper. So you'll hear revs, squat, go. Now, if I'm moving, I'll ride onto this log. It'll be very short, but I tend to have the revs up, and then when the front lands and compresses, that's where the rev is actually occurring. When you pick the front up and we drop the front wheel, as we're falling, that's when the revs kind of begin, okay? So it's... Now, of course, this is the same on the Enduro bike. I haven't warmed this up, so hopefully it revs well enough for what we're doing. So when we come in, it's going to be the same thing on the Enduro bike. Rev, squat, and then go. Same if I'm stuck. It's a bit wobbly here, but should demo. Rev, squat. And then of course, if we're punching, it's the same. I'll use the big concrete for it. So that underlying pattern is in all of the techniques. Now I know I didn't show you splat, but there's no need to show you in that. It's very clear in there. You'll hear everyone revving first, you'll see the squat, and you'll see the go movement from there. Now, it's actually very cold out here tonight, so I'll grab my cup of tea and stay warm. So, as I said, don't get confused with RSG being a technique on its own. It's really important you understand it's a pattern. And we need to establish that pattern first. And when we do, tonight I'm not going to explain how to implement RSG, that's for another video. But when we establish that pattern, it carries through so much more of your riding. So, for example, it covers all your obstacle riding. Imagine if you're approaching a very steep hill with a very sharp bottom, not a big long curve into it like a big ramp where you can roll in, but something where the bottom is very sharp. Essentially, we RSG and generate lift at the base of that. We'll use this on obstacles, we'll use it on gaps, we use it to wheelie. Honest to God, if you want to wheelie well, RSG is the pattern that will set you up for that. And on top of that, if you're someone who struggles to pick the front wheel up, in slippery conditions or whatever, RSG as a pattern will set you up for that. And then we adapt the pattern to the 3 different techniques for obstacle riding. So it's really, really beneficial. If you establish this really well at the beginning, it will stop you from having problems later on. When you move through the different levels and skill sets within obstacle riding, ride technique is the easiest. Punch technique is then the next hardest in terms of timing, and then splat technique is the hardest of the lot. But as you work through those, if your pattern is well established, it's so much easier to learn and you'll have far less problems. So otherwise, every time you learn something new, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the drawing board and start again. So really important for future learning. Now, we're going to talk about this in relation to ride technique here. Now, the first point is, do you remember how ride technique, how the lift is generated in ride technique, which is lift by geometry? What we want is to approach an obstacle such as this. When we come in, we want to compress the bike a little bit. We don't want to fully bottom the bike. We just want to compress it enough to set the geometry. And then we're going to stand and go, release the clutch. The clutch is going to apply a force to the chassis, and it's going to apply that force in a way where you're going to generate lift. So ultimately what we're doing as a rider is we're going to set the conditions to generate the lift. When you get ride technique correct, it's not very physical, so any rider can do this, and there's very big windows, very big margins for error. So there's plenty of room to make a mistake and be slightly out of time. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the different components on the approach, and this will give you a better understanding. So the first thing is that if we're going to set that geometry, we're going to need the power to do the work, or the energy delivery to push on that center of mass, to push on the geometry of the bike to create the lift. So we want to compress the bike so the swing arm goes like this, and then we want a really sharp, hard acceleration so the chassis does that. So the sprung mass, did I get that the right way, Jace? Sprung mass, or fixed mass as I like to say because I get so confused, will rotate, it'll rise, and it will move forward. So we'll get that lift out of it. And it needs to be a very sharp acceleration. Now, we often hear people say that throttle control is everything, and when we're riding into obstacles, I'll hear people talk about throttle control on obstacles. As a trials rider, we don't use throttle control. Throttle control will If you only ride with focus on throttle control, you'll never learn your clutch control. If you focus on clutch and accelerating via the clutch and controlling the bike via the clutch, you'll develop in turn your throttle control with that. So you'll end up with both. So you'll never lose throttle control. But on a trials bike, as a trials rider, the throttle is availability and the clutch is delivery. So the throttle only determines how much I can actually use, what is there. The clutch is how I deliver that. Now, when we're delivering the clutch, it's not just slipping, it's not just dumping the clutch. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about it. One of my posts from, I think I posted 2 years ago, and we were testing some stuff on social media, and that post kind of blew up a bit. It was about clutch control and extracting torque and power from the bike using the clutch. And it was amazing how many people just said, oh, that's just slipping the clutch. But it's much, much more than that. To give you just a brief taste of it, when we release the clutch, the position to which I let the clutch out is fundamentally my torque adjustment. The speed at which I let the clutch out is fundamentally my power adjustment on the bike. So if I set the RPM and assume I'm climbing a hill, say we're climbing up a hill and I've got my finger out, the clutch is dragging, it's delivering some torque. Now, torque, you can, in an overly simplistic manner, you can think of torque as the ability to do the work. So how much can that energy being delivered by the motor, how much can it push? So say I'm slipping the clutch and I'm riding up the hill, delivering torque, and then I get to a steeper part and the bike comes to a stop because I'm not delivering enough torque to climb the hill. If I let the clutch out a little bit further, it's delivering more torque of what is available from the throttle, and then I can start climbing again. If it levels out, I'll have more than I need, so I can back it off. So essentially, the position with which we move the finger to is your torque adjustment. The speed which you get there is the power adjustment. Because fundamentally, power is work done over time. So the faster you do the work, the more powerful you are. It is. So hopefully that makes all sense to you. If you have any questions, remember we are live. Jessica is on the comments at the moment. So if you have a comment, if you have a question, please jump in and ask away. Now, throttle acceleration is one of the biggest problems I face, especially if you have experience as an enduro rider. The regression going back to using the throttle instead of the clutch really significantly reduces your lift, like really, really badly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over the computer now and show you a slideshow that can explain this more clearly. So if I jump over here to camera 4, here we are. So when I see this all the time, and once you see this flow chart I'm going to show you, you can't unsee it. And anytime you watch hard enduro fails, that's the clearest place to see it. It happens a lot in trials videos as well. Often in trials, because the bike's lightweight, they will get away with some of the technique stuff. The enduro bikes, because of the mass differences, it will bite people a bit harder generally. So I'll show you this flow chart of what happens when people accelerate on the throttle. Now, when they approach an obstacle, they will crack the throttle instead of the clutch. And because the RPM on the throttle is so slow, it won't necessarily generate very much lift. It tends to push you forward more. And so I'll show you this, and this might be the wrong order to show you, but go to camera 2. So you'll see a rider will come along and they will accelerate on the throttle. And then one of two things can occur. The front either hits too low, the bike will stop hard and they go over the handlebars, or the front wheel hits high enough. And when it hits high enough, it then splits off into two more parts. You've got two options here. The power either overwhelms the rider or it overwhelms the traction, one of the two. Now, if it overwhelms the rider, that's when you see bikes flipping over their head. So you'll see this in things where, say for example, they're doing a beach race and there's a big limestone block and they come along, they crack the throttle, front doesn't really lift. That gummy tire grabs the limestone tire at the limestone rock, and then suddenly it's got all this grip, and then the rider is overwhelmed and the bike goes over their head. The opposite occurs if conditions are really slippery. So if it's really slippery or not enough traction, the power overwhelms the traction. And then you get two options. The front, if the front was high, it'll drop really hard. Rider often goes over the handlebars. Or the best outcome is it drops to the skid plate. And this is the best possible outcome. The problem with it though is that the rider will often think, oh, I did it, I got over, but it wasn't perfect. And then they come in and they'll give it more power and they start trying to throttle harder. They'll preload harder. They'll do a bunch of things we're talking about tonight, which just makes the situation worse. Now, if we jump over, so I'll go back to here. And if we look at the graph, we're going to graph out how a throttle acceleration looks. Now, you'll have all seen a dynograph at some point in time. So to a certain extent, I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but this is how a throttle acceleration looks on the bike in front of the obstacle. So as you're approaching, you'll crack the throttle here, and over time it rises and then it ramps up dramatically because here there's not a lot of power being delivered, there's not a lot of work being done. And then as the RPM rises, you'll get a significant increase in the work and the power being done. Now that is whiskey throttle in an image, clear as bell. You've all watched, you know, your America or Australia or wherever's funniest home video show, and you will have seen, you know, a mum or someone get on a bike with no experience, especially if they're on some old motocross bike. They will crack the throttle. Not a lot happens, just at that first bit. It starts pulling them, their body weight gets thrown back, the throttle stays open, they can't shut it. And then as the RPM rises, that power delivery increases and it goes from and then it ends up with that and the bike tends to flip or loop or jump up on the back wheel. And that's fundamentally what happens with throttle acceleration. Now, if we jump across here, if you imagine you're approaching an obstacle, on the approach to the obstacle, not much happens on the ground. And then as you're beginning to climb the face, that power is increasing. So when you're there at the face and you're there on the back wheel or whatnot, back's pounded into the obstacle, you suddenly get this big ramping in power, which is going to overwhelm traction or overwhelm the rider. And it really blows things out. Now, what we can do instead is we can accelerate on the clutch. Now, none of this stuff is to scale, by the way. None of this is measured out perfectly, but it'll give you a very good feeling and understanding of how this works. And this is also really important because an acceleration on the clutch is way, way safer than on the throttle, much safer. I charge more for hard enduro coaching because most riders don't have the clutch control skills in place. And if they do, my life is so much easier and it's much safer. If we look at a clutch acceleration, here at the beginning, there is a lot of energy delivered because we have a spinning flywheel. We will rev the bike and the flywheel will be spinning nice and fast. And then when we let the clutch out, the energy in the flywheel will be delivered to the back wheel. We rev it up, we let it go. So right there at the beginning, you'll get a big hit of energy, but then it tapers off and eventually it transfers in and it crosses over with the power still being produced by the energy, the motor running. So you'll get this big spike at the beginning and then it tapers off. And where this becomes extremely valuable is when we start riding an obstacle, as you're climbing the face, the energy being delivered to the back wheel is tapering off essentially. And it's very unlikely, or much less likely, I shouldn't say very unlikely, but much less likely to overwhelm the rider or overwhelm the traction. And we've done a lot of work at the bottom. Where you get the big hit of energy is where you have maximum inertia. When your body and your bike is stationary, it's really hard to get it moving, and you get that big hit of energy, which is also on the ground where you've got the traction. And because you guys know how to use good technique, you'll have good leverage and everything else. So you'll have traction in that moment and you'll be able to use the energy from the flywheel. So you get a much, much better outcome from the situation. So hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. Any comments or questions, Jess?
No, just a lot of, we have Richard and Sue watching with a hello from them, and @DLee191 said, "Heyo."
Hello everyone, so awesome. Good stuff. If you do have any questions, jump on at any moment in time and ask away. So that's the power and the torque adjustments and understanding that. There's one other little point that I want to touch on, and this is in relation to people's fear of the clutch. Now, it's very ingrained in most riders that when the RPM rises, that means we're going to do something. When you crack the throttle, this is the go button. And you're so used to anything occurring being driven through the throttle. And RPM anxiety is a very big problem. When the RPM rises, and I don't care how big and tough you are, when the RPM goes up, so does your heart rate. It's a really important point. But when we're doing this in relation to obstacles, we're revving the bike without load on it. So we have the clutch in, the clutch is either slipping and we're only delivering a little bit of it to keep us moving, or it's completely in depending on what you're doing. And what happens is, the slide is only opened a little bit, and then we allow the RPM to build over time. Especially 2-strokes, 4-strokes do it as well, but the burning of the fuel is a cycle and it will keep building on itself. So what I'm going to do is just quickly show you on the trials bike. On the Enduro bikes, it happens, but because of the power bands and whatnot, it actually just takes a little bit, it's a little bit harder to hear and see, and it's less obvious on the Enduro bikes, but it still does happen there. Do you mind just giving that lens a clean on that one? Just so it doesn't fade around. And I'll grab my bike while the guys are just tidying this up for us. The trials bike is the better way to demonstrate it, as I said. They're that little more linear. The X-Trainer's not bad because it's quite linear in its power delivery. So what I'm going to do, actually I'll just turn the bike around. Oh, perfect. Thanks, man. Now, I've just turned it around so you can see my throttle hand here. Do you mind just zooming into my throttle hand there, Jess?
Oh,
just,
the camera?
Yep, just zoom in. Normal, pinch the fingers. That's it, just to my throttle hand. That's him, that should do it. Now, just tilt it down a touch. No, at the thing.
Sorry.
That's him. Now, I'm going to turn the throttle just a tiny amount, a very, very small amount, and I want you to listen to the RPM. So I'm just going to turn it a touch and then hold, okay? So here and hold. Now, that was only at the grip, I reckon it would have been about 3 or 4 mil, 5 mil max, nowhere near the complete turn of my throttle. And you hear how high the RPM went. That's because the motor is running a cycle, and through every ignition it keeps adding, and it builds, and it climbs, and it climbs, and it climbs. And your heart rate is directly connected to that, so your anxiety will go through the roof, which is totally normal, very natural. I still get anxiety to a certain extent from the RPM, but when we do that, it's actually not producing a lot of power. At that moment, the slide in the carburetor is only moved up a tiny amount. So yeah, it is drawing in more fuel because the motor's speeding up and it's drawing faster through the carby, but it's not actually drawing a lot of fuel through. The needle jet, the needle on the slide hasn't fully opened the main jet, so it's a long way off producing more power. You need to be burning more fuel to release more chemical energy. So when you are sitting there and the bike's revving up, you're not necessarily using lots of power. You've just got a flywheel spinning. So it's important to keep this in mind because we're not actually using lots of power, and that's why you'll tend to hear me say energy rather than power. Because it's not the power of the bike, which is the scary bit, which can really overwhelm you. It's actually just flywheel speed, flywheel inertia, and then when we deliver the clutch, that slows right down and it dissipates very rapidly. So Really important to keep that in mind because most riders will have a significant level of fear and anxiety around it. I will never ever forget for the life of me, the guy who I consider my coach is Juan Pons in Spain. He coaches some other bloke called Tony as well, you may have heard of. But Juan always said to me years ago, he said, rev the bike, think about the step, wait, then go. And every time I'd rev it, he goes, you're not waiting long enough. What are you doing? Wait, let it build the RPM up and then go. Then you've got something available to work with. So, cool bananas. Okay, the next point. So if we go back to the obstacle now, and I've just gone and put my bike right in the way. If we go back to the obstacle, the first point on the approach is we need the energy. We need the energy available. So the very first thing we're doing, as within the RSG technique or pattern, is we're revving the bike. Now, the next thing when we approach is you'll hear lots of people say you need to preload the bike, preload the bike, preload the bike. You'll hear this all the time, and preloading is one of the biggest mistakes that gets made within obstacle riding. Really, really big mistake. Because the next thing you're going to need with that RPM, with that available revs and energy that's there, is you're going to need traction to use it. And traction is such a big thing. When we're riding obstacles, remember I said we're not going over an obstacle, we're riding up the face. And we're going to get as much lift as we can, and then we're going to climb the face. It's very much about traction. If you don't get traction on the ground, if you don't get traction on the face, you can't do anything. We actually don't want to lift the wheel away from the obstacle or away from the ground. We actually want to stay stuck to the ground as much as possible, and that is the suspension's job. Really, really important point. So when we approach an obstacle, and I said to you, preload the bike, what would you do in that moment? If I said to you, I want you to press down really hard on something on the ground, imagine you're a kid again, and you're going to stamp on your brother's foot. You won't just push down into the foot, you'll jump up and then you'll drop, allow yourself to fall onto the bike. If you were going to bounce at any point in time or jump, you will drop really quickly, you'll jump up in the air and you'll allow yourself to drop. And what you're fundamentally doing is you're lifting yourself in the air and then allowing gravity to accelerate your body mass down, and then you're putting that momentum of falling into the bike. And it totally works, but it causes a really big problem. It introduces a really big window in low traction or complete loss of traction. So I'll show you what I mean again back to the graph. So I'll jump to camera 2. So when we're preloading, when you approach the obstacle, at the beginning here, you'll have body weight and bike mass both pushing down, because downforce is traction. Just like in Formula 1, if it starts raining and it gets slippery, they don't suddenly take the wings off the cars or anything. They want more traction. They're not going to do that. The wings provide downforce. The more they push down into the car, the more they can brake, the more they can accelerate everything else. So when we're traveling along, we have body mass and bike mass being exerted on the ground. So this side of the graph is traction. This side of the graph is distance and time. So on the approach, as you're rolling in, you've got this nice even mass, nice even traction. And then you decide to jump up in the air because you really want to push down on the bike. And at this moment, you push yourself up. And when you push your body's mass up, your feet will stay on the pegs, you'll push down into the pegs, and you'll push your body mass up. And there's an equal and opposite force put down into the foot pegs. At that moment, you get a big spike in traction, which is fantastic and it's awesome. But eventually your body tops out. And when your body tops out, your body weight comes off the bike. So you've gone up, but all of your body weight has been taken off the bike, because to fall, you have to have nothing underneath you. You can't be connected to anything underneath you. So as you begin to fall and your body's falling and falling and falling, and it's a very natural habit as humans to allow ourselves to fall as far as possible to build as much momentum. Because when you're a kid, you learnt from stamping on your brother's foot or whatever. So you'll allow the body to fall a really long way, And sometimes in the process, depending, especially if you've got really fast rebound, I hear this all the time, is people want more lift, so they wind the rebound up. Rebound does not generate lift, and it shouldn't create lift. If it does, you're losing traction in other places. If your bike is set up really fast, you'll actually drop well below the actual bike's mass, because the bike's spring will have pushed it into the air, and eventually that'll top out, and the bike's weight will also come off the ground, so you'll have less traction again. Again, none of these graphs are to scale, they're just a representation. So you'll get this huge dip here, and then you'll just get bike mass alone. And then as your body compresses down on the bike and you push in, then traction will spike again. Now, the big issue is this big loss of traction, this here, and it's a really big window too. It's from there to there. And often riders underestimate how big that traction window is. Now, when you down the track and you've been coaching with me and you're suddenly an amazing amazing obstacle rider and you're well down the track and you're competing against Tony Bow, when you're at that level, you can preload on the bike and use it really effectively because your timing is fantastic and you can feel exactly those moments when you need it. But for the rest of us mere mortals, the problem is you have this huge window in loss of traction right before the moment you're going to release the clutch. And if you happen to overlap the clutch release with that moment in time where there's not enough traction, you will wheel spin and the whole thing's over. Once you wheel spin, then you plow into the obstacle and everything else. So that is a really big problem with preloading. Now, instead, what we can do is we can take this initial part here, this first bit where we've got bike mass and body mass acting on the ground, and then standing up, we can use that part and just shift it forward to here. So when we roll in and we're approaching the obstacle, we just slowly lower ourselves down to the start position within RSG, and then we stand up. And the standing up action provides an equal and opposite force down into the bike. But in that entire approach, you have this nice consistent traction without any big drops in the traction window. So preloading can be a real problem for you. So how it visually looks on the bike, I'll go back to this camera, grab another drink of tea. At least it doesn't feel like it's got too much colder. So when we're going to approach the obstacle, when I come in, what the body movement looks like is over a long distance, I will slowly lower myself down and then stand. And that maintains that minimum level of traction so it never drops below body mass and bike mass. And then when I stand, that increases the traction. And that's why within Rev Squat Go, you'll have heard me in the last video say we have the revs on, we lower ourselves down to a start position, and then we stand out of that, and the stand happens first. We initiate the stand and then we release the clutch. Really, really important point. I'll demo that again on the trials bike. Now I'll over exaggerate this, so I may lose some other things out, but I'll try to exaggerate the slowly lowering of the body. So revs on first, slowly lower down, go. Revs on, slowly lower, go. So that improves your timing. It gives you a much bigger window in timing. When we're learning, we want the biggest windows of time possible to be able to hit the mark. Over time, they'll get smaller and smaller, and you won't need to move this slowly. You'll move at a more consistent rate, an appropriate rate, but at the beginning, we always slow things down too much. So hopefully that all makes sense to you guys. Do we have any questions at all?
No, I just Sue
awesome.
mentioned that, yep, that's me, but I think that was when you were talking about the power going on.
Oh, yep, no problems at all. No problems at all. So we've gone through all that preloading. Now, the stand must happen before the clutch. That's all correct. Remember that we're setting geometry on the bike and we're setting the bike up to do the work. Now, the next point is within the standing action. So we've got to the point where we've got some traction, and something I see a lot of, and it gets used a lot in the enduro circles, and I understand, and it does work relatively effectively. You'll get away with it if you're a tall rider. If you're a smaller rider, it's a bit harder, but I will see riders throw their body weight back at this moment. So when they're going to stand, instead of standing up, they'll do this. And they'll throw their body back. Now, there's a difference between throwing your body back and standing up and back. There's a time and a place where we will stand and go up and back. But if you remember back to our leverage theory, and that is if we stand on the bike and we pull through the bars, the rear wheel will be levered into the ground, won't it? If I'm going to throw my body weight back, I'm letting the handlebars go forward, or I'm going to push off the handlebars to push my body back. In doing that, you're losing leverage, so you'll be losing traction in the process. What we do instead is you want to squat down, and when we stand, we're going to be standing essentially vertical. We're going to have to oppose the pull on the handlebars. So we're going to have to go back in some way. So we're going to go back like this. If I don't go back a little bit, I won't be able to pull on the bars. As I pull on the bars, there's going to be an equal and opposite force pulling my body forward. So when we're going to lever on the bike, we want to be like this into the step essentially. That allows us to do it, but we don't want to throw our body weight back. That will reduce the traction. It'll make it a lot harder. Now, this action requires an active or a functional posterior chain. So what I mean by this is when we stand, it's essentially like an Olympic lifting movement. We need our knees, our quads to work to straighten our knees. We need our glutes to work to pull our upper body back. If our glutes are not firing, you can't even pull on the bars. The shoulders need to come back, and then the arms can pull in from that. So when we stand, it needs to be like this. Now, most of us, this is a huge problem in the population in general. You'll see people do this, just their knees will work, and they'll go and pull like that. Sometimes they'll start really well, but the glutes are really weak. And when they pull on the bars, the glutes can't keep their upper body back, so they do this, and they pull themselves forward. And when that happens, you don't get any leverage. So you need a really good, strong posterior chain. Now, it doesn't need to be crazy strong. I just said strong, so I'm just being a complete hypocrite. It doesn't need to be crazy level strong. It just needs to be functional, so everything moves in together as one. We don't want to see that. It's got to be all together in one movement. When that occurs, you'll get this beautiful leverage, you'll get really good traction, and the bike will react really nicely underneath you. The leverage is only setting the geometry and improving the traction that you have on the bike. So it doesn't need to be a massive force, but it needs to be strong enough to hold, essentially. So that's a really big point. I can't tell you how much improvement I've seen in riders. We have one rider in our WA Trials Academy group. She's been working really well at the gym, and the improvement in her ride technique is huge, especially on things like small logs like this. Within ride technique, the steeper the obstacle, the more brutal the force is. So when the obstacle doesn't have to be big, but if you've got a small log and it's a bit undercut and it's really vertical essentially, it'll be really forceful, and in those moments your posterior chain needs to be even stronger. Jess asked a question.
Oh, it's not necessarily a question, but it may just help. You may want to talk about it.
Yep.
But at D. Lee has said, one of the common failure models I face with RSG on occasion, I will go, but only the bike will go, and my body will sort of stay stationary in space, and the bike rotates around.
Goes ahead, yeah. So that's something we see a lot of as well, is people won't actually move. And when you're on the bike, because of all the anxiety and everything else that's occurring, we'll see riders let go of the clutch and the bike shoots ahead. And it's a very common one. And it's easy enough to work through with the right patterns. And all you do is go back to the beginning of the RSG implementation, which I'll be showing in another video. You start that again and you can work that through. The good thing about this is you can do it everywhere. Like anywhere that you're rolling around, you literally just rev, squat, go. And you just give it that pull on the bars and a push in the pegs. It doesn't need to be big. It can just be a little rup and just enough that you can just pop a little bit, and you can do that pretty much anywhere.
I don't have my question on the screen.
Yes.
But could people just like mimic that movement just throughout the day? Like you're at the coffee station making your coffee during... No, I know it sounds silly, but is that something like that? Practice a little bit of a squat to help them activate their glutes and everything.
When it comes to that action, when there's the body's not responding within the pattern, there's a number of ways to work through it, and we want to trigger those things to move. Now, if there's a major bodily structural issue somewhere in the chain, you really want to address that because you want to address it early. The earlier you address structural issues, the further you're going to go and you'll have less restrictions. You'll progress much faster. This is something that can be visualized a lot, that can really help push through, but there's really fixing and solving the problems. There's too many variables in there to diagnose in a video like this. We can look at the individual. So is there any other questions at all, Jess? Let's grab a cup of tea while I'm sitting here still.
Dilly has put, oh no, hang on. No, just Alistair has said, great refresher, enjoying it.
No worries, awesome, man. Now, so we're not throwing the body weight back. It wants to be that nice functional movement where you're standing up and slightly back. We're not throwing back, and then that levers into that back wheel and really works well. Now, the second last thing, we've just got two more points to cover, which are really important. The first one is shutting the throttle off. And probably in the last, say, 3 years, a lot of people have been saying to me, when do I shut the throttle off? And well, I should say, it's been a question I've been asked forever. When do we shut the throttle off? And it's something that the odd response to that is you do not need to think about it. You don't need to shut the throttle off. It's going to be shut off for you. And that's because when we approach an obstacle, when we come into it and we're standing and we're levering the bike, so if I stand and I pull those bars up and I want a nice long leverage action, so I stand up and I pull the bars to me, my hand is doing this and the bike is doing that. So my throttle is being naturally wound off. In trials, we actually ride big obstacles in spite of the fact that the throttle's being shut off, and we often don't want this to occur. So we do a range of things. The first one is anyone at an expert level will have a fast action throttle, and then we tend to actually increase the speed of the throttle again. So I modify the cam in my throttle so it's faster again than the stock fast action throttle. That way it requires very little turn of the throttle to get to full noise to the top end. And I want it to stay there as long as possible so it really builds up that speed and keeps going. The other thing that we do practically on the bike is that when we grab onto the throttle, when we're like this, we will go like that, we'll grab forward on the throttle and then we'll pull it back. So on the bike, should be all right here. That looks okay. So on the bike, if I was like this and I rev the bike really hard, that's all the way to the throttle stop, and then I squat and I try to pull, and I've got my wrist there and this wrist nice and straight. What we do instead is we go back to straight wrists and then we do the action from that. So we'll reach forward and pull the throttle to the throttle stop. That helps keep the RPM up. especially if you're going into multi-steps or you've got a big climb and you need to carry on from that. But when you're naturally riding, when you're riding obstacles at the normal level and the lower level, as you stand, the throttle is going to be naturally wound off. On top of that, everything that you hear on the bike is going to deaden. When you do this correctly and you accelerate on the clutch correctly, you'll hear the bike going, whoa, and the RPM will die right down. Because remember, the RPM that you're hearing is not producing a lot of power. It's just a motor spinning really quickly. When we deliver the clutch, all the kinetic energy of the spinning flywheel gets delivered to the back wheel, and all of that energy does work in pushing you up. Once it does that, that flywheel is slowed right down, and then you're back at like idle levels. So it'll die off really, really quickly. So you don't need to shut the throttle off. I know when you go to actually implement this in your head, you're going to be thinking, shut it off. One of the biggest regressions, as I mentioned earlier, is getting anything that gets you thinking that this is go or stop is counterproductive in the future. It'll cause regressions and we'll have to bring a rider back to the beginning and start again. I actually had a rider, I think I might have mentioned this in last week's video. I had a rider who was very, very much a throttle rider, decades of desert racing, and this is so ingrained as the go button, it's crazy. Now, it was such a big problem to overcome. What we did was I took the throttle off the bike and off one of my gases, a 300, and then I put a solid left-hand grip on there, so a clutch side grip on the right-hand throttle side. Disconnected the throttle cable completely, and we just cranked up the idle on the carby. So he had the bike at revving up at you know, it wasn't real high RPM because it was just the idle screw, it wasn't wide open, but the revs would build. And what it meant was he had to learn to deliver everything 100% on the clutch because the throttle just wasn't there. When he did this experiment, what became really obvious was how much he was trying to turn that throttle. It was so ingrained. And then he was riding everything on the clutch, and then he had to learn to clutch in, let the revs build, and then go again. Ended up being a really good exercise. I'm not saying you go out and replicate that today. Don't do that. That's dangerous and whatnot. You remember, I'm a trained professional, theoretically. No, but in a coaching setting, we had all the controls in place. But it became really obvious how much he was turning the throttle. So for me as a coach, I don't like anything that encourages a rider to think of the throttle as go or stop. It's just availability. Really big point. Cool bananas. The last one, and so I'm throwing all these things that are kind of common knowledge and you should do, and the last one, the biggest one, is unweighting. Unweighting, it works and you can use it. It's a throwback to me. Now, when I was a kid and riding trials, the first thing that you get taught about obstacles is the double blip. And the double blip has been bastardized quite a bit these days. It means all sorts of different things. But fundamentally, it's two blips of the throttle, not the clutch, two blips of the throttle. I've never heard anyone blip the clutch at all. It was always a pop of the clutch, just my experience. You might know otherwise. But it's two blips of the throttle, one to pick the front up and place it onto the obstacle, and then the second one to drive the back wheel into it. And this works, but it's not something I teach because it doesn't generate lift as such. On top of that, 99.9% of riders have already got that in place before they're coming to a coach, so there's generally no need to teach this. With raw beginner riders, we'll teach all sorts of things around throttle control to get them comfortable with it and accelerating, but that's another thing. If you're doing trials or hard enduro, you're well past that point. And it's not a technique that actually generates any lift, but back in the day, it worked because no one in the 70s used their clutch. When I was riding a TY80, actually no, I remember trying to deliver on the clutch, but that's besides the point. Back in the day, you were always taught it's just throttle control. And of course, that's all changed these days. So I want to do a little demo of that. I'll just move this out of the way. Every time I park a bike, I have to park it in exactly the wrong spot. Now, the idea of double blip is a real problem because the acceleration is on the throttle, which means it's a slow acceleration, which means you need a lot of distance to perform it in. You'll need run up and you'll need run off, and it doesn't generate lift. Totally works to get you over lots of obstacles. I do it all the time. I'm sure you do it all the time as well. But it's basically like this without the clutch. And you see how much the back wheel kicks up. So a big part of doing this was letting the bike come up underneath you, which was unweighting. Now the problem with this is when unweighting becomes a habit, you start riding steps and then you take your weight off the bike. And remember what I said, obstacle riding is lift plus climb. So when we're going to ride a step like this, the last thing I want to do is pull my weight off the bike as it's climbing the face. So what it ends up looking like, hopefully I can demonstrate this well enough. I don't exactly train all the bad habits, do I? I shouldn't do anyway. So as they ride up the step, they'll unweight near the top. Oh, I still got it. See, I can't even demonstrate the problems. But as we ride up, they'll unweight near that top. I'll try again. Still caught it. Terrible demonstrations, Neil. I'll do it a different way. And you end up like that. Luckily, I just caught that edge. But if you've ever seen that where they're on the top, and you may have experienced it yourself, where you're riding steps and you're just not quite making it on a regular basis. That is the habit of unweighting biting you on the butt. What we want instead is to climb all the way to the top. So instead, I want to lever into the step and keep the lever happening all the way to the top. It doesn't mean that you keep pulling all the way through. We just want to hold that position and hold tension against the face of the obstacle. So it looks more like this. You end up on top with nice straight legs on top of the step. Now, I was asked about slow-mos because I know a number of people said I was trying to replay and slow-mo it. The slow-mos and supporting PDFs and other documentation is going to be going onto my website. So if you're not already haven't been there, make sure that you click on subscribe to my email and just go down there. You'll see, save it in your browser or whatever, trials and enduro skills, all one thing.com. Go to that website, all the documentation is there. There's a history of all these videos will be popping up and there'll be more stuff happening. In the future, there's going to actually be courses, so you'll be able to go through them and get far more data there.
That's awesome because at D. Lee had said if you could do a couple of slow ones or side shots of it at the end would be great.
Yes, because we're delivering these live because it's the fastest way to get these things happening, and then you can go to the website and see the supporting documents there to round out your knowledge. So awesome. That is all for tonight. So I hope that was of some value for you. We have a lot more coming. So this is going to be happening weekly on a Wednesday night where possible. I might miss a night or two. So make sure that you have subscribed to the YouTube channel and you're following me there. That way you'll get to see them and you'll be notified of them. Other than that, is there any other questions?
No other
questions?
No.
I'll have a cup of tea and give you a second just to ask any other questions if you do need to before I jump off.
Yeah, so with those demos on the website, will that just be able...
They're not on the website right now as of today's date, the live filming of this, but they are coming very soon. Sorry, Jess?
Because I was just going to say, D. Lee said it'd be appreciated to just get some basic RSG over the obstacles. Just want to watch the body move.
The movement, yes. And Dan, you're in my coaching community, so we can provide you that all in there, so any point in time.
Cool.
Cool bananas.
Richard and Sue just said thanks, back to RSG tries.
Yeah, exactly that. No worries, guys. I will leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you later. Catch you around.